All right, so we're back, and I hope it. I hope this does what it's supposed to do now. Anyway, back to my conversation. I'm sorry, Miss Chavis, I interrupted you. Um, are you still there? We don't have her
Can
there.
you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. So, where were we? You were speaking about what happened. It was your son that was shot, correct?
Yeah, I was talking about the circumstances surrounding his
Right.
death at the hands of NYPD, and that's what led me, into looking into what was actually, how murders committed by police were being handled through
Mm-hmm.
meeting other families and going to the trial and things like that. And based on, and this went on for like maybe a 5 year period that I witnessed this. And throughout that time, I came to the conclusion that the only way to effectively deal with the lack of accountability is through a nationwide demand, because I saw that the issue was systemic and
Right.
that there were entities who were vested in keeping police exactly as they were. And I did not believe, I still do not believe, that scattered efforts will make a dent or change in the overall equation. It's gotten to the point where there literally is a nationwide epidemic. So, as a result of all those things, I started a grassroots organization called National Action Against Police Brutality and Murder, and I launched a petition called National Action Against Police Brutality and Murder that's seeking police accountability across the United States. Okay, I do support families that are fighting for justice, and those families should be supported. But it grieves me because the amount of power and support and even resources that's gathered together on behalf of a particular family, I always felt could be used to benefit us all across the nation. I'll give you an example. Right now, we're just still in the midst of protests concerning George Floyd, okay? National protests, protests outside the United States. Everybody is watching and looking this case behind that murder. Other families who never had a chance to get justice or even have their case even investigated are also coming forward seeking justice. But there is no serious attempt to actually hold police accountable for the murders. Every fight that you have seen for the last couple of years, whether it was Sean Bell, John Crawford, Tamir Rice, each and every one of those families wanted justice. Justice is the prevailing cry. Yet, what we hear politicians and officials suggesting are reforms, policy changes, things that do not bring about justice. They are things that give the appearance of giving justice, but in reality, that's not what they do. What they do is help us to see even more so what police are doing, okay? That police are actually committing murder. I think, it's a chase, it's a spinning around, going around and round in circles because we know what police are doing, okay? If we didn't know before, we have video to show what police are doing.
Danette,
But yes.
I'm sorry. What you're seeing, you're giving me so much information, and I really
Mhm.
appreciate it. But I really want to jump in and ask you a question because,
Okay.
from everything that you're telling me, it almost sounds like there should be some sort of pot. There should be some sort of fund nationally for people who are victims of police brutality, and is that sort of the direction that you're going in? Am I reading you correctly?
No, I'm not saying that there should be a fund. I'm saying that the situation should be resolved that necessitates a need to have a fund.
Correct.
So
Correct.
I want police to be held accountable. Now, parents, families, they must get out there and protest and they must demand justice because they will be totally ignored. The case will be swept underneath the rug. What I'm saying is that while those situations are going on, there needs to be an overall fight that is seeking justice across the nation, that covers the voices of those who have gone unheard, that protects us all, because the reality is any one of us can be subject to the same atrocities that we see being committed at any day or hour. So we don't have the luxury anymore to sit back and wait and see what happens in somebody else's case. The belief has been for a long time that, when a certain case, especially a high profile case that's in a murder, that's in the media, that if they get justice, that we win. We all win. We all get justice. That is not true. Okay, you can
Exactly.
have a murder committed, okay, like even in, God forbid, George Floyd case, okay, all four of those officers can be convicted and sent to jail for 20 years, and police the very next day can go out and commit another murder, and we will be back marching and protesting and demanding justice, because the conviction of one officer, I don't care how much time you give him, it does nothing to deal with all the rest who
Right.
are still functioning and operating in the same mentality. Okay, so these are the things that I'm fighting, to have addressed and dealt with once and for all,
But
finally.
let me ask you a question, because you brought up an interesting point. You stated that if we have a murder that's nationally recognized, that's picked up nationwide, right? That even if those one or four or three officers, whatever it may be, they go to trial, they become convicted and receive 20 years, and hip hop hooray, they're going to jail.
Mm-hmm.
The very next day, the police can go right back to the killing, right? So,
Yes.
so basically,
Nothing, what I'm saying is nothing changed in the overall picture. The
right? But
same
that's the
things that was
point.
in place that allowed it are still there, although you just convicted this officer.
So basically, the rules, the regulations, the laws that govern a policeman, a police officer, their conduct are still intact, thus
Exactly.
protecting them from stuff like this, like murdering somebody, beating somebody, wrongfully arresting somebody. That's at
Exactly.
the root of what needs to change, correct?
Yes. And like you said, all those things are still intact, although you've just convicted an officer.
So now, do you, with all that being said, um, right now in this climate, since the murder, and I call it a murder of George Floyd, do you feel like I do? Are you of the mindset like myself that you're watching these corporations and companies and chain stores? They're all sort of protecting their bag by saying, hey, Black Lives Matter, or hey, we're going to devote 15% of our shelf space to black products, or hey, we employ, we're diverse, we're a company that believes in diversity. Or do you feel like these things are sincere, or do you feel like these companies are doing what they would do in any other event, which is protect their money?
I do believe that a lot of it has to do with protecting their money. A lot of it has to do with following the current status quo, because right now, it's popular to say Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
I can remember 5 years ago, there was a lot of hatred being thrown out at Black Lives Matter, supporters. The government itself was trying to create laws, to punish people, Black identity extremists, they
Right,
call them,
right.
people who fight for justice. And
Yes, sir.
yeah, but at the root of it was focused at Black Lives Matters and other Black organizations who fight on behalf of the liberation of people of color. So they were aiming and targeted there. But not so long ago, it wasn't popular to say Black Lives Matter. So now, because of what happened with George Floyd, and you have a tremendous amount of white people who are out there holding up signs saying Black Lives Matter. So now it's like it's popular to say Black Lives Matter. Okay, so the corporations, they're going to get in line with the program, okay, because they're following along. Okay, they know how to play nice in order to make sure their cash flow keep flowing.
That's right.
So that's how I see that.
So the reason why I'm bringing that to your attention, or I'm basically, I think that we as a people, when these things happen, as we discussed before, the laws are still intact, correct? So when these things happen, we always get the pacifier. When a baby's crying, when you have a baby, they're crying, and you give me the pacifier, and they get quiet for a little while before they really need that bottle. But What I'm saying to you is this society and system that we live under, anytime we've reached a point of that's it, we've had it, especially as a collective, where you see black people, Latino people, Asian people, white people, you see a collective get together and say, listen, this is bullshit and we're done with it. That's when everybody starts whipping out the pacifiers. And I think that people in that heat of the moment start saying, hey, look, there's change. No, there's not.
Right.
They're suckering you with these little kibbles and bits to get you rocked to sleep. So then you fall back and you go, we made a change. Right. We got a new holiday. We made a change. We got a new street name. Nah. I think people need to understand we coming for it all this time.
Exactly, and that's how it should be.
Yes.
Particularly when you're able to harness that amount of power and the world is watching. You don't ask for crumbs in a situation. You go for the jugular in that type of situation. Go ahead.
I'm laughing because, you and I have spoken very briefly through our relationship over time, our digital relationship. And it's funny that we always reach this point where it's like we're in like unison as far as, mindset and what we're trying to get at. And I think people really need to like hold on to it and understand like, hey, listen, this life isn't going back to normal. And you know what? Karen and Ken that work with you in your office, they can never take back what they said. You know what I mean? And people need to be held responsible. Now, am I saying tomorrow we're just going to go out and start doing things that are extreme? No. I don't even want to insinuate that because...
let me say this. They never truly take it back. They never take it back.
No.
They say something foul and they apologize. They say, I didn't mean it, whatever. They never take it back. They just remove what showed you who they really are and how they really feel. Okay, they just remove the indicators. Okay, so you can go back to sleep and continue having your illusions. That's all. They never moved nothing. They never changed nothing. But I wanted to say one of the main problems, being an activist or being a person like the things that you just shared, there's a lot of like scattered activists that know these things, and that see through the games being played, that do not accept the crumbs being offered. But you are hard pressed to make your voice heard loud enough so that the people hear you, because the people are willing and quick to say, yay, victory, yay, change. Yep. And you have a handful of people that screaming from the roof saying, bullshit. Ain't nothing changed. Ain't nothing changed. It's a game. So you're hard pressed to be heard, even as an activist, because these are large organizations. And if the system wants the people to believe that change is on the way, their mouth is bigger than yours. Okay, they have several organs in media to put that information out, for the people to consume it. You as an individual, you could be an individual in media that your whole platform is straight no chaser. Or you could be an activist. Look what you're competing against, trying to tell the people the truth of the matter. It's difficult. That's a major issue I see with this, is, snatching the people out of the mouths of the wolves, trying to make them, see that they're deceiving you. They're leading you off the cliff once again.
That's another interesting point. I think people don't realize how conditioned they've become. Because if you notice, you talk to people, and everybody's like, I want to go back to work. I want to go back to normal. I want to go back to... How can you think about that? Look at how you were treated during this time. These motherfuckers just took out like what, $55 billion for a quote unquote bailout, right? But then they turn around and say, you guys got to go back to work. And I know we were giving you unemployment and give you an extra $600, but we don't want you to become dependent on that. And you know what? We're going to take away these $600 because you know what? Then you're never going to want to go back to work. What? How do you sound? Like, doesn't anybody hear what they're telling you? This is the third bailout. This is the third bailout. Who's paying for that? not them. So how is it that you don't get it through your head that no matter what party you're on, which is, I'll tell you right now, I don't do political parties, but no matter what party you're in, they're giving it to you from both ways. You're a rotisserie chicken, and you need to understand that. And when people start this whole, like they started this whole, you know, we got off the plantation and they moved, I'm a black conservative or I'm a, you know, Latin conservative. You're only changing sides. You're just getting a different master. That's it. You're an idiot, you know, and I just don't understand how people don't get it. That, well, I do. They're that conditioned. So
It's a, you know, there's serious blinders on the minds of the people. You know, that's the part of the equation that, you know, I start looking at it in spiritual terms, you know, because the amount of deceit, the amount of the inability to see what's clearly being displayed before you, it's like, for me, it causes me to look at it not just physically, what you see on the surface, but spiritually. You know, what's going on with the people? You know, what's in the way that's preventing you from seeing? How come a handful can see it? It's like it's so plain to them. You know, it's kindergarten, you know, but for the masses, you know, there is a delusion going on, you know, and the way this system works, it's like if you work within the system, trying to change the system, you know, it requires you to become a part of the system. You know, in other words, it reproduces after its own kind. Okay, you can't go in as you are, legit, 100%, standing on your conviction and truth, because the road there and the requirements require you to conform or to take certain actions and to take certain stands just to get in the door, you know, just to be heard, just to have the reach, you know. And in spirituality, you know, we would say that's the devil. You know, it reproduces after its own kind.
like a
Okay.
virus.
Yes, yes, yes. So you could see it with individuals who start out right and somewhere along the line they go left. You can see it with laws and policies that were good when they started out. But by the time it finished going down the road, in order to fully manifest and be established, it was no longer what it was intended to be. So that's a whole nother conversation because
We're
we're
going
not
to
going to
touch
get
on that, actually.
spiritual here because of, you know, your audience would be like, oh, what is she talking about? Okay. But that's
Yeah.
cool because a lot of people are confused these days. And
What?
some people need that kind of upset to provoke you to go underneath the surface of what's being displayed. You know, you cannot believe what you see. You cannot
No.
believe what you hear. You have to go deeper than what's being displayed and told to you because there are other forces at work here.
Well,
Okay.
I would say this. There are so many forces at work that move this system along that peeling back all the layers would make somebody commit suicide. I think a regular person. I don't think that people really have an understanding, a wholehearted understanding of what really is the driving force behind this system and how it works. There's so many intricacies to it. However, what I am going to say, and I don't want to touch too much on it because we also have a guest that's going to speak to sort of the spiritual side and the religious side, because that's definitely something that's being used as a sort of a tactic and tool, and as it's always been throughout this country's history. But what I'm going to end this conversation with is this: the one thing that can change this system is the one thing that they respect, and the one thing that they respect is blood. Period. Hard stop. End of story. That's it. So I don't want to be too extreme, but that's just a reality. And with that said, Ms. Chavis, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm hoping that I will have you back again at some point for another discussion.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I just want to tell people that, you know, our nationwide demand, we have over 1 million people who have joined it. And I want to encourage people. You can Google National Action Against Police Brutality. It'll be the first thing that comes up when you type in National Action Against Police Brutality on Google. Please sign it and share it, and visit our campaign fundraiser, because we're raising funds, because we don't want to do this fight just by signature only. The objective initially has always been to start a nationwide movement that can back up the demand that people have signed in black and white. So thanks again for having me on the show.
Of course, everybody out there that's watching, please look up Miss Danette Chavis and her movement. Follow her, like her. If you could drop $1 or two, do that too, because the one thing that these movements need is support, financial support. Things don't happen for free, but whatever you can do is appreciated. And Miss Chavis, again, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Good evening, folks. I hope you enjoyed what you saw so far. I want to point out something because, again, this is about building a community. So, hoping you can see my shirt. 11220. Sunset Park is where I'm from. And these shirts were produced by two very good friends of mine, Mr. Louis Soto and Mr. Robin Padro. And they have their own clothing line called Urban Mechanics. You can look them up at urbanmechanics.com. They also do custom work, and their designs are definitely fire. So if you're looking for custom work, or if you're looking to get your Sunset Park merch, go to urbanmechanics.com and give them a look up. All right, moving along. Our next guest is a gentleman from my neighborhood. Let's see. He is going to speak to the historical context of racism in America. Somebody I respect very much. He, excuse me, he's a community liaison at Affinity Health Plan and Star Movement. He's a graduate he studied psychology at LIU, graduate from, and he's a great human being, if I would say so myself. Somebody who I respect, and especially respect his opinions and grasp on history in this country. Welcome to the set, Mr. Joseph Estrella.
How you doing, brother Ernie?
How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Wonderful.
Hope to provide a perspective here that's a little different.
Yes, yes. So, wow, where do we start? There's so much going on in the country. And as you know, we've been having discussions on our own. I'm sure you've engaged in discussion with people on your own. The one thing that often comes to mind when I speak to people is they sort of don't understand how we got here. So I guess my question to you to start off would be, does somebody who doesn't have an understanding of the nation's history, and I mean just from a basic standpoint, like they don't understand slavery, they don't understand Reconstruction, they don't understand Jim Crow and how long it lasted. Like, can somebody like that really have a dog in the fight when discussing where we are at now?
Well, this is a multi-layered problem. What I always try to do, since I tend to be moderate, so I tend to be able to listen to both sides of the story and try to figure out where both sides are coming from. So the first issue we have in having these kind of debates with people who are either ignorant of our history or on the other side. We have people, the oppressed people in this country, which tend to be the people of color in general. Just think about, if you're an oppressed people, you have to come together and unify as one, right? In order to fight the oppressor, right? Correct. So you end up forming a group identity that you're bound to, because you need to be able to protect yourselves from the power that's oppressing you. But the oppressors, they devil in individual rights, right? So white people tend not to see themselves as a group. They see themselves as individuals. They don't even see themselves as white. That's a label that's an artificial, socially constructed label.
Yes, it is.
So one of the problems that we have is that people of color are talking as a group of people towards people who see the world individually. And this is why you were talking right over each other, because we just don't understand the dynamics, the power dynamics that this country is established on. So the first thing I try to do is to make them understand, is to make the group that's oppressed understand that they're not bad people. Like racism is being thrown out, it's just thrown to the wind and hope it sticks on things. So I think it's starting to get devalued because everything becomes racism, therefore nothing's racist. And I think it's just people just don't have an idea of the other person's perspective and where they're coming from. Now, there's sometimes where it's flat out racism, and we should call it out when we see it. But then there's most of the time I see is just pure ignorance. And then, as we spoke earlier before we went live, once you have a belief, you'd rather stay with a false belief than admit to being wrong, no matter what the evidence is. So most of the people that I see fall into that camp. Even though they know they're wrong, they can't admit to being wrong. So they'll hold on to false beliefs come hell and high water. Are they racist? I couldn't tell you. I'm not inside their minds, but they're just unwilling to change their opinions, no matter what the evidence is presented in front of them. So I just think that's how human brains function.
Right. And
I have people on the left of the political spectrum that have beliefs that they won't change no matter what the evidence is. So I just think that's a human condition that we're following. So having these kind of the public discourses, hopefully people can see that they need to hear the other side of the story, because the other side may have parts of the truth, right? Your side can have the totality of the truth. And we're living in a political climate and a social climate that it's basically downright tribal, right? My group knows best, and we are the good. And if you belong to the other group, you're the evil people that we have to get rid of. And we don't take things, and we don't take the nuanced arguments into account. So you introduced me as a great human being, and what I always say is, as great as I am equally as flawed. So I've made some shitty decisions. I have done things that I'm not too proud of. And if it's on my resume, if people look at the resume, they might not think I'm a great, those people who think that you can't grow and mature, you can't make mistakes, they might think I'm a shitty person. So that's how things kind of work, you know what I'm saying? But one of the problems we have in this country is that we have deified our founding fathers. We have mythologized this country, that we're all we did it, where the streets are paved in gold, and if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, and all those kind of right. Yeah. So
let me ask you a question, because you said something interesting there. You said we've deified our founding fathers.
Yeah, now, our founding fathers are deified, unfortunately.
Right. So how did we get there? Because even as a young person, like let's say, I'm in junior high school, and I'm taking my my global studies class or whatever the case may be. How is it that I can sit in a classroom that's teaching me quote unquote history and still allow that these stories that we're being taught about these great men to stay intact, when we all know that that's not the case? How does that happen?
Well, to the victors goes the spoils, right? They get to write history. Right. So that's
his story.
That's how it is. Yeah, his story. But that, again, what I always bring it back to is that is not unique to this country. That's unique to any country who forms a civilization. They are going to praise their heroes and look and make them into these perfect, infallible human beings, because that's what a hero in our mind is. And I think people want to see infallible people. And there's something about human beings is why we watch NASCAR, right? We want to watch the accident.
Wait,
So
time
we
out.
want to put
who
a
watches NASCAR?
we want
watch NASCAR.
yeah, right. We want to put our people on a pedestal, just to watch them crumble, just to knock them down. And so, my NASCAR analogy is like the only reason why you watch a car going around 500 times is because you're waiting for the accident. You could care less if they go around 500 times successfully. You're just there to see the accident. So,
right.
This is true with, if you look at Gandhi, if you look at any great leader, we only highlight their greatness, and we really don't talk about the complexity of these individuals and how flawed they were in different areas. And that shouldn't negate, as you know, we grew up in Sunset, right? So I always tell people, I say, I have friends who've done a lot of bad things, a lot of bad crimes, but that same person would take the shirt off their back and give it to me. That's how complex this is. So he's neither all bad or there's no all good people. We're basically a mixture. Given a situation in the right environment, we could behave good, and we could behave bad. I mean, that'll segue you into Dennis and with the spirituality, because that's basically what human beings are like. So we have deified our leaders, and people go around believing that they were perfect people or they did no wrong. And the disillusionment you get when you find out that Jefferson owned 600 something slaves, and 9 out of the first 12 presidents were slave owners. It's an awakening, especially if you're in the oppressed class, to learn these facts. When you end up learning these facts, and you normally have to learn them on your own, or you have to be at college level history classes to learn this. So I took a lot of history classes in college as my electives, and we were taught this during our electives. I was never taught this from K through 12. I had no idea, but later on in college, I learned, and then of course independent reading helped me out a lot to fill in a lot of the blanks about our founding fathers. So I think that
I'm sorry to cut you off, but So at what point does one come to understand that these great people go from being great to being rapists, or go from great to being slave owners, or go from great to being the youngest slave owner in the country? All these sort of flaws that come into view when you start looking for them, and once they're discovered, how is it that we can allow these people to still be held up in society? I mean, I understand they're the dominating class,
right?
But it brings me back to my point early on with people and understanding where we were, where the country was, and where we're at, and why and how we got here. So,
well, I think now with this whole George Floyd and this awakening, and now with all the protesting of statues and all this stuff, I think people are now starting to look, and the information is becoming more readily accessible, and people are starting to look at the whole picture of these men. But I'm one that I believe we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I normally bring it to a personal thing. And I tell people to do the same thing. Like, my dad growing up was my hero. A lot of people thought he was a great man, viewed him as a great man, but my father was heavily flawed. He was misogynistic. He was homophobic. He was a lot of things. But he's still my father, and to me, he's still a great man, despite his flaws. So Jefferson, his contribution to this nation, you can't even question it. The Declaration of Independence and the ideals that he penned to paper, although we haven't fulfilled them, we probably haven't gotten very close to it, but his ideals are still important. So we can't cancel people out because of their flaws. We have to present them with their complexity, that yes, he said this, but he lived this life. And I think when we all look at each other as human beings, there's a lot of incongruence in our lives. We say something, but if we put in a certain scenario, we may behave differently than even our own moral standards. So this is just what it is to be a human being, and that's the that's the information I try to bring, so we could understand Jefferson and understand the struggles he went through. I'm not one that believes that the founding fathers did not know that slavery was wrong, because they damn well did. A lot of most people know that keeping somebody, taking
Hello.
somebody's freedom away, isn't something that anybody will enjoy. So they did know. They just made a decision between economics,
Right.
which is what this country is founded on, right? Money
Exactly.
and morality, and they
But
went with money,
but
and
see,
that's
here's the other part of that. And again, I'm
yeah,
sorry to cut you off.
yeah, no man.
Like, okay, understanding that we are humans and we are flawed is the easiest part
Right,
because it's simple. I
right,
know, just like you know, just like everybody in your immediate vicinity understand that we're flawed, that we're weak. We're not disciplined the way we should be because we're human. It's that simple,
right,
right? So, my problem starts with the fact that these are people throughout history who we look at as humans and understand that they're flawed, but to the level that they're flawed, that's just something completely different. It's like saying, hey, I discovered electricity, I invented the light bulb, I built the first engine. Oh, and by the way, I had like 30 child sex slaves in my basement that everybody knew about, but since I was so smart, nobody did anything about it. So
hmm
you have these individuals throughout history that all seem to come from the ruling and dominant class that now, fast forward to 2020, that we are, the blinders are they're off. People have been hip to this information for a very long time. And again, as I told Ms. Chavis earlier, we're at the point that it's like, no, we're tired. This is done, right?
right.
Why are people pushing back on the change? It
Well,
it you
nobody
know
wants to. Nobody wants to. People want to hold on to their heroes. And we have developed like a worship culture to celebrities. Period. Right. We look at athletes, movie stars, even professions. Right. We looked at the Catholic Church with the priests when they were saying they were committing these atrocities. Nobody wanted to believe it. Police officers, people of color, has been saying that they've been, police brutality. We said it, we showed it on video, and people don't want to believe it, even when it's dead in their face. So again, another human condition that we have. It's change is very difficult. Um, people become people receive solace through their beliefs, and they don't want to let go of something they believe in for the unknown. So what else? So what is the substitute you're giving me for letting go of all these mythologies and this belief?
hmm,
And it's reality, and nobody wants to deal with the reality of the problem. They rather deal with the legend, the myth of it, instead of dealing with the complexity of it, because human beings want things to be simple, right? That's what our brain is here for, right? We have a complex environment, and we try to dumb it down as simply as we can to, zeros and ones, just like a computer, a binary system,
right.
so we could make life life-saving decisions at a moment's notice, right? We can't compute large level of complexity when we were on the savannah of Africa and lions and predators were coming. We had to make quick decisions. This is where stereotypes and racial biases come in. We had to make quick decisions in order to survive. And the people who made those quick decisions passed down their genes, and we're the descendants of those people. The people that took a long time to make a decision and want to make it really complex, well, those people didn't live. Those people ended up in the bellies of predators. So we are hardwired our brain to make quick judgments, right? This is the difficulty with police and police shootings and all this stuff. It's life and death calls that you have to make, and your implicit bias that you don't have conscious control over kicks in, and you might do something that you're not even unaware that you're doing, because you're in a life or death situation. So
Frozen.
again, this is what makes it complex, but most people want, uh, answers for dummies, 101. They want to make it simple, so it becomes purely just race. It's because he's only black. It's only race. It has to be race, and it's not anything else besides race. Now, obviously, we know race may play a problem to these things, but how much do we weigh it? How much was it just race as opposed to 100 other variables that was going on at the same time? And given you put me in that situation, and I think somebody's gonna take my life, uh, I'm gonna shoot the shit out of you. Just I want to get home to my family. So we could all understand that we want to get home to our family, um, and what we would decide to do in the given situation. So these are very complex problems, and I think most people don't want to listen to the complexity of the problem. They want very simple black and white answers to very, very complex questions that have been with us for 400 and somewhat years. We haven't solved this problem because it's a very complex problem. How do you how do you how do you get the ruling class to give up its rule?
Blood.
And like you said, it's never been done peacefully in the history of humankind, right? It's only come through bloodshed, but we know that's not something that we're going to be able to do in this country with the level of weaponry and advanced weapons that we have here. So this is a great experiment in this country. How do we get a multiracial, multi-ethnic society to work as well as they possibly can together? It has never been done before. We've tried to pass laws. Martin Luther King said you can't legislate humanity, and it's going to be at a snail's pace. And the oppressed group doesn't want to hear. Like grandfather had to wait, my father had to wait. How many generations of waiting? Like James Baldwin say, how long do I have to wait for your progress? We're talking about how many generations, but unfortunately, I don't see it changing any other way unless there's like a natural disaster that wipes out 90% of the population. I mean, that's possible, and then maybe we could reconstruct this some different way. But given the opportunity, it's going to take you raising your children, me raising my children, to be tolerant of other people, to understand, to teach them the history. And that progress is incremental. It's how evolution occurs, right? Over a long course of time. And it's not going to be in a revolutionary way. The people of power are not going to have an epiphany and decide to say, you know what? Yeah, we have oppressed people. Let's change it tomorrow. That's not going to happen. It's never happened in the history of the world. So I don't know why anybody will expect it to happen.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. To me, the way I see it, and the way you've explained it, they're very parallel. So what I will say is, I don't see it as complex. I see it as honesty, right? So people have a hard time with honesty, and I don't find honesty being complex. The truth of the situation is we have a ruling class that has always sold people, well, just wait your turn. Right. And all these other sort of, just nonsense. It's just nonsense over time. And they've continued it and continued it, no matter what point in history that you see progress made by people of color, at some point or another, the ruling class and their minions on the ground, they're like, yeah, you know what? I'm not too happy about these people doing so well for themselves, so we're going to go in and burn this town down. Right. We're going to say somebody whistled at somebody, or they touched somebody, or they did, they just did something and we had to take care of it. And this is repetitive throughout history. There's been more than one case. There's been hundreds of cases where sanctioned government officials have gone into areas and just decimated the people, right? I mean, in Philadelphia, the MOVE organization, they dropped dynamite on their house. Yeah. You know what I mean? And the reason why I'm saying all this is simple. People who do not look like you and I or understand who we are, right? They are so stuck in their ignorance and their unwillingness to learn about the country's history that it will remove the blinders and understand that they've been lied to, right? And I think their world would just come crashing in on them. Yeah. So now what? Where are they? You understand? It's sort of like the red pill moment.
Yeah.
where do they go? So
Right.
their whole sort of understanding of what is or what's true falls apart. And
Well,
I think
that's
that's
what
the
white
reality of
supremacy
it.
was built on,
Right.
is all those myths.
Right.
And that's what the white supremacy allows for class division. That's really what white supremacy was founded on by the elites, right? So the elites put in white supremacy to keep poor whites feeling better than poor blacks. That's basically what it is. And the whole mythologizing that they've done of bootstraps and picking yourself up and doing all that was
Bogus.
just to keep class division, right? Because
Right.
obviously our founding fathers, Madison, Clay, all the founding fathers, Hamilton, they all knew that, well, we can't have a democracy where it's one man, one vote, because the large majority of the country are poor people, and they're going to outrule the aristocratic class right out. They'll vote them right out of office. So they knew that they had to create a system in which you could keep the class divided. So as long as you keep them divided, and even voting against their own interests, which is what the Civil War was, right? Maybe let's say 3 or 4% of the population owned enslaved people, but they still got the other 80% of the population to go fight a war to maintain slavery that was actually against their own interests, right? Because you can't compete with free labor.
It's
So
a
if you're a
hamster
poor,
wheel.
right? So this is what that's has been done historically, and like you said, the education component of it may get people to understand that we have more class, people in certain class, that they have common interests and they should unite on common interests. Now, the labor movement in the 20s, you started seeing that, and every time you saw that, the aristocrats or the elite see that the classes are forming together, well, they seen monarchies fall, right? When the serfs started uniting and went against the monarchy, so they know what's coming.
Yep.
So that's when the propaganda comes. That's when the division comes back in, because they know that they have to make sure they keep
The
class
infighting going.
going on. So
Yeah.
part of what I always try to do is say, listen, let's discuss what we have in common instead of sitting there discussing where we have our differences, because we have more commonality than we have differences. And we could stay with, me, you, Dennis, I'm sure that we're all one paycheck away. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're all living check to check. We don't have millions of dollars of funds just sitting there. So why are you arguing, like you say, that you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, when those people are multimillionaires and they
don't
can't go
care.
broke if they wanted to? And
Yeah.
me and you are one paycheck away from being broke. One, COVID thing from being out of a job and not having enough savings to pay your rent, pay your mortgage, or pay anything. So
Yeah.
let's vote on what we have in common instead of voting or thinking that being in the Republican tribe and me being in the Democrat tribe, that's what we're going to sit there and fight about all the time.
Right.
And, making both parties are making out like bandits. So, like you said before, it's just a different master that you're praising, which one you want to have, but it's not like one is extra is
It's better
better
than the
way
other.
than the
But
other. Yeah.
I myself don't want any master, because to me this system, it just doesn't work. One, and two, I think people really need to start realizing that you need to get away from the parties to take over. That's really the reality. People
Right.
are so stuck and conditioned on, oh yeah, I have to join this party in order for me. No. People need to collectively get away from political parties and form the People's Party.
Right.
A group that is for the people, lobbyists for the people, that serve the people's interests. And I think once people start to realize that, which they won't, I mean, we'll be
Right.
knee deep in a civil war, before any of that comes to fruition. But that's a
Yeah.
whole other
Yeah.
topic. But
Yeah, you're a
anyway,
little of an anarchist compared
yeah,
to me. So
just a little bit. But Mr.
I mean, I
Estrella,
don't think I think it's a possibility. Yeah.
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 But Joseph, I really
Yes.
appreciate you coming on the set for this first episode.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate your time, and I hope in the near future, again, as we discussed before, you can make your presence felt on another episode.
Anytime. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend
Thank
and
you.
be safe out there. And
Likewise,
we'll speak
buddy.
soon.
All right. Bye.
All right, people. So that was Mr. Joseph Estrella. I hope you guys enjoyed that exchange. lot to unpack there. A lot to unpack. But at the same time, it's good to share the information, get into an understanding, and, learn something. Or not, become bored by it. Anyway, my next guest is a Mr. Denis Bruno. Mr. Bruno has been a friend of mine since childhood. He's been in the church since 1988. He was in the youth ministry with Emmanuel Pentecostal Church and also involved with the Assemblies of God, which Emmanuel was a part of. He also, was in the Christ Seeks Youth Ministry, Church of God in Christ, and he was under Pastor Raymond Jones. And tonight I want to welcome my very good friend, my brother, Denis Bruno. Welcome to the set.
Can you hear me? I'm good. Thank
Wonderful,
you.
wonderful. I hear you.
Okay.
Dennis, so there's
Yes.
so much going on, but
Yeah.
how are you doing? How's your family? How is everybody?
We're doing good. We're doing good. The wife and the girls are doing fine. I just want to say thank you for having me on the show. I know this is the first and some technical difficulties, but the information that both Danette and Joseph shared was really, really good. I mean, like you said, there was a lot to unpack.
Yes.
A lot. And obviously, in a small segment, being the first show, you can't always do that. But, it was very good to hear both of their perspectives and experiences. And Joe kind of gave a lot of information historically, which is very good.
Yeah, man. It's one of those things where you start to get into a conversation, and the person's just giving you so much. You just want to let them run with it, because
Right.
I won't be one of these people that will ever portray to know everything, because I don't.
Right.
And
I don't need.
I just think it's important for people to take that moment and to share the information with everybody.
Right.
And it's a good thing. And then
Right.
sometimes we run over.
Yeah.
But the reason why I brought you on tonight is because we've had quite a few conversations regarding the time that we're in, what's going on with the church per se, and just the overall spirit of people. I think that right now, over the last, I would say, 13 to 15 years, there's been this steady drumbeat of people sort of separating and really looking as to themselves as just this solid this soul identity, and just becoming very self-absorbed, especially with the way the social media works nowadays, and
Right.
These TV shows that they put on, these reality shows that we both know aren't anything close to reality.
Right.
But my point is that I think people have become so self-absorbed that they don't understand that getting through life is there's a collective. Even within their family, your family's a collective of people, and you
Right.
need each other.
Right.
But when you don't have community, it's easy to divide people up and conquer them.
Right.
And I think that right now, especially now, there's all different faiths, but I specifically brought you on to speak because allegedly this is a Christian nation, and I hear that from a lot of people.
Right.
You are one of the faith. We have many friends in common who are of the faith or declare themselves to be Christian. People I worked with, across the spectrum, I know many people who follow. So I just wanted you to come on and maybe speak to begin with, that spirit of being self-absorbed and being focused on themselves. I mean, how does the church, allow this sort of, I wouldn't even know how to put it. How does this come to be? Because it's not just people who don't who don't follow any faith, who are not Muslim, who are not, Buddhist or Jews, or this is just, this is everybody, right? So I've visited churches for events, and I see a lot of show, and I don't understand it. You know, a lot of pomp and circumstance.
Right.
And I thought I was at a concert. You know, so I would just like you to start off and speak to sort of that whole collective and what's going on with the direction of the church.
Right. Well, the church, for the most part, you know, the American church, the American evangelical church, so to speak, historically has gone through a lot of transitions. And obviously, what happened socially, as Joseph brought the historical aspect, and what happened socially kind of goes along with what's happened and affected the evangelical church in America historically as well. So you find that as the trends change or morph or evolve or devolve in society, in one way or another, historically in this nation, in the past 120 years, it has affected the conduct of the church, sometimes with a negative outcome. And so we do see from scripture, you know, speaking from the evangelical Christian perspective, we do see from scripture that some of this was already vetted out prophetically, that we would be in a time like this where men will be self-absorbed, will be lovers of themselves, you know, disobedient to parents, haters of God. So there's things that the Bible already had depicted that would have predicted would be the state of humanity, not just within the church, but also in society, that we're actually seeing.
Right.
And so you spoke to the fact of the church having, you know, when you went and you visited, the whole dynamic of the worship service experience in a Protestant evangelical church is not like it used to be, where just an organ drummer. Now there's lights, now there's all this technology, and technology has played a part in this selfie generation. And so everything kind of marries or kind of tailors into the me generation, in the sense of, look at me. So that's kind of like what your experience going to a church and seeing what you saw.
Right.
And so it makes people kind of more self-absorbed in their demonstration, even as Christians in this country.
Okay. So I know that at a certain point, well, not even from the very beginning, for quite some time, evangelicals have had a solid stronghold, especially in the political spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, in this point in time, with the election of these presidents, whether it be Barack Obama or Donald Trump, right?
Mm-hmm.
How is it that the evangelical church can go from being of this, you know, moral, family, faith sort of objective? I mean, as far as I know, my entire life, the Republican calling card was that: family, faith, and morality.
Right.
And
Right.
it seems as though, it doesn't seem, it is. The
Right.
church did a complete 180
Mm-hmm.
with the support of Donald Trump, because I mean, I'm no biblical scholar, but I know he has 3 baby mothers, that he wasn't faithful to none of them.
Right.
I know that from what I see, he openly has lusted after his daughter many a times. I understand that he doesn't even pay his taxes. So I can't imagine he's ever paid any tithes. I mean, do you believe he's paid any tithes to the church?
I don't I don't know.
I mean, so
I don't know.
I guess what I'm saying is, has this sect of the church basically prostituted themselves for the sake of political gain?
I would say yes. And I think there's enough scripture to prove that yes, that is the case. There's testimony that I've even heard of former Republicans, and again, to kind of carry over from the previous guests' comments, from Danette and also from Joe, that I've heard enough and I've seen enough where the Republican Party, like you said, or the evangelical church has been a supporter of the Republican Party pretty much historically in the last 100 years, I would say.
Right.
But for the Christian, or the one that professes to be a born-again Christian or a Protestant, adhering to Christian faith and Christian doctrine, I was reading today, preparing for this session, and a very common scripture that we all hear, John 3:16, that even people that don't know the Bible, know or believe, know it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But then when you take that scripture, which is in fundamental Christianity, is one of the staples of the gospel, of the good news, that it is for everyone.
Right.
And then you look at the other scriptures where Jesus himself spoke and said, by this, and he talks about what this is. He says, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if, conditional, if you have love one for another. Right. Now, as you talked about and read in my kind of introduction, Sunset Park, born and raised,
Yes, sir.
I live in Delaware now for the past 5 years, but born and raised all my life up until I moved here in New York City in Sunset. Right. So, and I got converted, in a church right there in Sunset. Yes. And I experienced some of the biases as a Christian within that congregation.
Wait, time out. So what you're saying to me, and I want you to sort of visit that. What you're saying to me is that at some point during your journey of becoming a Christian, that in your own church, you've experienced bias against you from other church members. Sure.
And it was bias based upon, the aesthetic of my skin color. And I knew that.
Specifically
it was because of that. And so it wasn't a fallacy. It wasn't something that I was dreaming up. It was pretty covert and overt in some instances. But I say that to say this, that in today's evangelical community and their support for political parties,
right,
the Christian that may be listening to this needs to be very careful, because there was no Democrat or Republican in the Bible. That's number one.
Wasn't.
Right. Number two, Jesus specifically, and I'll get to this in a second because I think it's very important for those that may be listening and are Christian or adhere to Christian beliefs. I'm not speaking to Islam because I'm not a Muslim, so I can't really speak to that. But I'm speaking to the evangelical community, or those that might be Christian or professing faith in Christ that might come across this part of this video or this live. That Jesus gave a parable, a response to a lawyer who said, what do I need to do to be justified before God or righteous? But he said it, the scripture says, he said it tempting Jesus, because there was an ulterior motive for the question. And Jesus knew that, and he said, well, you need to keep the command. You need to, keep the commandments. What's the great commandment? He said, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and then I'm to love my neighbor as myself. And Jesus said, well, if you do that, you'll be all right with God. You'll be righteous before God. But then the man insisting to try to lure Jesus into a corner with words said, who's my neighbor? And that's where we get the whole parable of the Good Samaritan.
Okay.
And so Jesus gives him a word picture of the story and says there was a certain man who was walking on his way and was jumped by robbers. I'll kind of make it short and condensed. Obviously, the man was Jewish because Jesus was talking to Jews. He came to the Jews. He said, but the man was almost left for dead there by robbers who took everything. And there was a Levite who was in the community, a religious leader, and walks past, see the man halfway dead, and just walks back, keeps going. Then a priest does the same thing, looks at the man and keeps going. But then the Good Samaritan, who the Samaritan and the Jews didn't get along with because of their ethnicity, the Samaritans were half-breeds. So to the Jew, the Samaritan was considered like a dog in the scripture.
Wow.
So the Samaritan, who was considered like a dog, had compassion on this Jewish man who was left there almost dying. And when he saw him, he put him on his beast, took him to a hotel or motel, bound up his wounds, did like first aid to him, I guess, then told the owner of the hotel, said, listen, here's some money. I'm going to go away. Whatever you spend on him to take care of him, put it on my tab. When I come back, I'll take care of it. And then Jesus asked the man the question that asked him. He said, now, who do you think was his neighbor from those 3 people that walked by that man? And the lawyer who was tempting Jesus said, well, the man who showed mercy on him. Jesus told that lawyer that started out trying to manipulate him and put him in a corner with words. Jesus told that man point blank, you go and do likewise. And the church, the evangelical church, has failed, in my opinion, to hold up John 3:16, for God so loved the world, and they have not done that commandment that Jesus gave that lawyer. Go and do likewise. In the case of George Floyd, in the case of racial injustice, police brutality, they've jumped on a political ticket and not rendered to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. See, and so the problem from what I see in scripture and what's happening with the evangelical community, they've picked a political side. And that has given them a piggyback to kind of get those 2 things that they always kind of want, which is, you know, same-sex marriage to be taken down and abortion to be taken away.
Right.
And so, and that's fine and well and good if you're a Christian and you believe in what the Republican Party, or if you're a Christian and you believe what the Democratic Party believes, but that's not the issue. The issue is
right.
the platform that evangelical leadership in this country has had, both on the media, in the news, and then when it comes down to the Good Samaritan voice, when somebody is murdered and somebody is mistreated, they're silent.
Right.
And so that's where the hypocrisy is, from my vantage point.
See, and here's the thing. This is also something that again we've spoken about in the past that I just have a serious time digesting. I think the wealth factor, the access to wealth, is an issue. It's an issue for me because, and a lot of people fight me on it, and they say, "Oh, but you don't know what these people do for other people." And I don't see the need for, you know, a pastor who obviously is married and his children are older, so they're definitely out of the house, to have like a 10-room mansion. Now, that's just me. Is it any of my business really that he has a 10-room mansion? Probably not. But when it comes to religion and people's faith, I would say faith is for the faithful. If you're that guy and there's all this going on, you should be the first one on the ground. And I know people fight me back on that and say, no, that's not what he's. I'm sorry. These are human issues. These are humanitarian issues, right? So what you do to the worst, to the least of me, sort of approach. So, you know, I have a very difficult time sort of making these things sort of come out in the wash. However, what I would like to ask you is, at this point, do you believe, from your understanding and your sort of knowledge and experience, do you feel that politics and faith should live in the same house?
That's a really good question. And again, for the believer or the Christian, the Bible should be what determines how you view that and how you actually respond to that as a person that believes in the scriptures. Now, in the Old Testament, which believers and Christians use, and because the Old Testament, New Testament is the Bible that Christians that we use. It's not just the new. We living in the new, but we have the old.
Right.
And there's persons in the Old Testament like Daniel and other prophets of the Old Testament that actually were spokesmen for God to God's people under other empirical rule, under Babylonian rule, under
Right.
Roman rule, under Grecian rule. And that particular person, Daniel, was summoned to be a spokesman for God before kings.
Okay.
Now, in the New Testament, we don't have that spoken out plainly, where we have personas that we can say, okay, this individual was a magistrate. This person, because in the times of the scriptures, we have the Roman Empire ruling over the Jewish people and prevailing over the known world at that time.
Right.
So if you're going to get into politics as a Christian, you have to be very, very conscious of what the scriptures say to you as an individual. Now, should they not get involved? I would say that's hearsay, because again, they can get involved. But the problem that the Christian at times has is, as soon as it becomes political, he has to fight to maintain his conviction of faith, because somewhere in the political scene he's going to be challenged to compromise. He's going to be challenged, whether it's through lobbyists, whether it's through the prevailing political party that he's affiliated to, and that person is going to have to know how to navigate themselves, because their faith should be premium, not their political position or their aspirations.
Right.
Once you become a Christian, that's supposed to become the number one priority in your life. Everything else secular takes on a secondary priority. Right. So to give kind of a black and white, clear-cut answer is kind of difficult. Right. Because yes, I believe there should be some kind of conscience within politics, because politics has to do with government. Government has to do with ruling over people, and people need a conscience to be ruled by. And I understand that. But then the problem is, it's the hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy that at times comes out of an individual that professes to be a believer, goes into political office, and then winds up compromising his faith because lobbyists are putting pressure, and now he's forced to act in a way that's not becoming of a Christian, or justify his decision on a certain policy, on a certain statute, on a certain outcome. And if he speaks a certain way, it may cost him his office. But then at that juncture, if he's concerned about losing his office, then he's already prostituted himself.
Exactly.
And so that's where the church today has to have a voice that's not democratic, that's not Republican. It has to have its own voice. The scriptures say clearly to the Christian that you're a peculiar people. Peculiar means different.
Yes, it does.
Peculiar means you stand out.
Yes, it does.
Peculiar means that you have to stand out, whether it means stand out against Democrats, stand out against Republicans, stand out against liberals, because yeah, you may agree with a percentage of what they say, but that other percentage you disagree with, you gotta stand there and say you disagree with that, and then have actions that prove that you disagree with that. And so when that doesn't happen, that doesn't translate itself throughout the Christian world in America, and there's this silence from the pulpits of America, from leaders that have television ministry, radio ministry, internet ministry, global ministry, and all it is this super hyper inflated narrative of what we talked about, which may have a truism about the elites and the agenda of extreme left-wing liberals. If you blanket yourself in that type of discourse and don't know how to speak to the person that has a knee on their neck that got killed by the police in an unjust lynching or massacre or murder, and you can get on the pulpit and then espouse Republican and political incentives and don't speak to that, then you have prostituted your faith. You have misrepresented the gospel. Because what I said to you earlier in that scripture, who was the neighbor? The one that showed compassion, the one that didn't look like you, the one that was totally ostracized from your culture of people and was thought to be a dog, had compassion on one of your own countrymen. That's the one who was the neighbor. And Jesus told that person, go and do likewise. That is an edict and a charge to everybody that's professing to be evangelical. And then if you jump on the bandwagon of, well, what did he do? What did this one do? How come this? You sound like the secular world, and you're not supposed to sound like the secular world. You're supposed to sound like Jesus Christ if you profess to be a follower of Jesus Christ. You're supposed to have compassion and speak to the injustice of what happened. If you're quick to open your mouth about abortion, about same-sex marriage, then you should be able to speak in the same tone about injustice when it happens right there in front of your eyes, and not say, oh, what did you do? What did no? And that's an indictment. And the Christian church in America has brought herself to a place where she must face historical and societal truth, and even truth internally, because the church, the last 120 years, has gone through its own racism. And I'll say this last thing. Many you spoke about my the intro, and you talked about Emmanuel when I was there in Sunset. And Emmanuel is part of the Assemblies of God, the largest Pentecostal denomination on planet Earth by numerical membership.
Okay.
What they don't tell you, as far as the history about the Assemblies of God, was the Assemblies of God actually in 1906, an African-American man named Charles Harrison Mason, who was a Baptist originally, but then he started the Church of God in Christ as God spoke to him and told him to start it. Many of the Caucasian or white ministers that went to California to this great awakening, this great revival that happened in 1906 to 1914, where people were like the people know nowadays know about the speaking in tongues and all that. All of that was happening, so people were flocking there from all over. So Bishop Mason, who was a black man, had white ministers that were ordained under him and licensed to preach and pastor. But because of segregation in the South, they separated themselves in 1914 and started the Assemblies of God and moved to Springfield, Missouri. He's from Mississippi. That history as a member of the Assemblies of God is never talked about.
Why is
It
that?
they almost tell you that it started in Springfield in 1914, but they don't tell you. So see, a lot of this undercurrent truth that's there, it's not just in secular history, but it happened that what we talked about in the beginning, how certain things societally creeped into the church, and the church kind of covered it up and acted like, you know, that's not the case. That didn't happen. But see, all of this is happening because the Christian church needs to understand that she needs to speak on behalf of what the scriptures say and not a political party.
But I think just to bring everything together, so to speak, I think that the church at this point, or Christians as a whole, have been sort of led along to cherry pick. They take what they want, sort of like at a buffet. You know, you go to a buffet, you see all this food laid out, you're like, I don't want that, I want this. Right. And they OD on that. Like they fill their plate till it's falling off the sides. So I think that what I've seen growing up is that they've been conditioned the church to do that. And as far as the position of politics and religion, living in the same house, your example was very clear and it's easy to grasp and understand, right? So the hard part is the practicing of it, because the people who do enter politics under a religious umbrella are not practitioners of a faith. They profess to be, they know the word, but that seems to be the only qualifier, because behind closed doors, it's definitely a different story, right? So where does that leave the faithful, right? Where does it leave, again, I say this all the time. Faith is for the faithful. The church is really not a good look. And I know Christians, Muslims, I know Jews. I know Jerry Seinfeld Jews. I don't really know any what are they called? Hasidic.
Yeah.
I don't know any Hasidic Jews personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know one or two Buddhists, but I say all that to say that their followings and their beliefs are for them, and they should be held on to close to themselves. You know, there are even people that I know that don't believe any of this stuff, and they believe that religion is all deep rooted behind African civilizations. And there's other people who believe in Santeria and
Right.
Brujeria. I know this, you know, we can go down a deep rabbit hole on that.
Right.
My point being is that in this country, this seems to be the popular or the focused religion. They are the pinnacle. They are the apex when it comes to religion in the U.S., right? But at the same time, the people who are faithful, who do have a strong belief and belief and connection, are being hung out to dry, because I know that there are a lot of them. They probably go to church. They probably have stayed in their congregations.
Right.
But they're not really following the teachings that are being handed down to them because of this specific reason. These pastors and these so-called leaders are involving political points. They're involving political aspects. They're demanding and teaching their followers they have to vote for Trump. They have, you know, I'm just saying Trump because that's the time we're in.
Right.
But how can somebody put themselves in that space with that understanding and look at that man and say, you know what? My pastor's leading me in the right direction. How? I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's a group in the book of Acts that the Apostle Paul, he being the strictest Jew of his day as far as all the apostles that are named, Joe would have probably liked to talk to him because he was well versed in many things, different languages, and he was scholarly.
Right.
But he was sent by God to the non-Jewish nations, the Gentiles, to preach. And he came among a group called the Bereans. And the Bereans were in a place, part of a city, an old city called Thessalonica, which is in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey area. And the Bereans, Paul commended them because after he taught and preached, they went back and searched the scriptures to see exactly what Paul was saying, to see if he was true and accurate with what he was saying. They just didn't take his word. And they went back and studied. And when he found out that they were doing that, he commended them more than other churches or other groups of people, because he said, you just didn't take my word for it. You went back and studied. And a lot of Christians today are not reading. They're not studying. They're just taking whatever. They just go to church before pre-COVID.
Right.
The mannerism was Sunday, show up to church, have a good time, worship, and then this whole contemporary terminology, get my praise on, and doing all that to me nonsensical stuff. But a lot of these people were not really reading and studying to become more like Jesus or becoming better disciples or better witnesses for the faith. Because if you're a Christian, you're going to try to live this gospel out.
Right.
They were just taking whatever was coming from the pulpit, sitting at home watching Christian television, taking whatever is being spoken to them, and not really studying and seeing the verification of what was being said to be true. So my encouragement would be to those watching that you need to really study, and you can't just be led by blind leadership in the sense of whatever your pastor is saying or your leadership is saying, that you just take it, swallow it, hook, line, and sinker, and you go and you're good to go, without you searching the scriptures to see if what he's saying is in concord with what you're supposed to be believing and acting like as a believer in this nation. Now, mind you, if this conduct was, because Christianity is global.
Right.
For God so loved the world, right?
Right.
We talked about that in the beginning, right?
Yes, sir.
So if the gospel is for the world that God so loved and Jesus so died for, then that means I'm supposed to be able to take the tenets of this faith, and if I geographically uproot myself from the United States of America and land in the remote regions of some untouched civilized indigenous group, I should be able to apply what I've learned there. But we've mixed the gospel with the American spirit.
Speak
And
on that.
And we have not learned to distinguish what the Constitution says: the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. That's not Bible, that's Constitution.
Right.
And so a lot of Christians don't even know the difference. They think that when you quote that, they think that's a verse in the Bible. And it's not.
No. Are you serious?
No, I'm being facetious.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I'm being sarcastic, but I'm actually trying to drive a point that the American Christian is so Americanized that he does not know the difference from the rhetoric that comes from America than what he's told in Scripture to do. So from the pulpit, there's this merging of two different messages, and it's confusing. And so that's why, because people don't study, people don't read, people don't do the due diligence as an individual Christian to study what the Scriptures say, they take whatever comes from television, whatever comes from conservatism, and they just swallow it. And they think it's Bible, and it's not. They think that if they obey the conservative ideology, that they're pleasing God. Or they believe that you know what I mean? So that's where the issue is. Because the American spirit, I'm going to be just as bold as I can be right
Please
now.
Do. That's what I want.
The American spirit is a bewitching spirit.
Ooh.
I'm going to say that again.
Yes, please do. I don't think they heard you in the back.
The American spirit is a bewitching spirit, especially for the Christian. For the non-Christian, a person that doesn't adhere to the Bible, this does not apply to you. But it's a bewitching spirit. Paul said to the Galatians, a group of Christians that were influenced by Jewish zealots that supposedly converted to Christianity, but then what they did, they infiltrated that group and then made them go back to the 10 Commandments and do religious duty to try to be righteous before God, when that's not what the message of the gospel is. And Paul told them in the 3rd chapter, verse 1, he said, "Oh, you foolish Galatians," and he's talking to a church that he established. He said, "Who has bewitched you that you should act this way?" And that's what I'm saying. Who has bewitched you, American church, that you act this way? Because you're not acting like the Scriptures. You're acting like anybody else that is in this nation, and you're supposed to be a Christian. You're supposed to act like the Scriptures. If you profess them, you're supposed to act like them, not American. You're supposed to act Christian. And that Christian act or that Christian nature is supposed to compel you to have compassion on whoever and whatever circumstance you see and witness, and not jump on the horn and be quickly one-sided in rhetoric. And then you leave that person that was like the Good Samaritan, you leave that person wounded and dead on the side, and you don't do nothing. You walk like the priest and the Levite. You look at him, you see what he did, and note the parable. Jesus never gave a deduction of that he deserved it. He deserved to be jumped by the thieves. He stole
what did he do?
What did he do? He gave the analogy. That was exactly. Did the Samaritan pick him up and does it say that he said, "What did you do to deserve this, man? What did you do?" Wow. No, he had compassion. Didn't ask any questions. Had compassion because the man was half dead, and he put him on his beast, which is probably a donkey, and took him to the nearest inn and took care of him, and then opened up a tab to the innkeeper and said, "Listen, whatever you got to do by way of medicine, food, anything he needs, put it on my tab. I'm coming back. I got business to tend to. I'm coming back." Well, who was the merciful Samaritan at that point? Jesus said, "That man." And that's what I have to say to the people that are watching. If you are professing to be a Christian and professing to adhere to the Bible and believe in Jesus Christ, you need to examine your tongue and examine your convictions to make certain that what you spout out or type out or post or blog or say hurrah, hurrah, because it's too one-sided right now. And that's why the church is a mockery to many people. People don't even want to hear it. People think it's a joke.
That's right.
Because the leadership has polluted the minds of the people to think American and not Christian. Sorry.
No. I'm glad you're putting it that way, but I want to speak to what you said earlier that led you to this point that that sort of really got my attention. You said that the American spirit is bewitching, right? But
Sure.
then you went on to speak about these examples where people who were supposed to be walking in a certain path would disregard their principle, because that's how I see it. These are the principles, they're Christian principles. They would push them aside to be more worldly, right?
Yep.
So it's correct, and it's sort of like dropping an anvil on top of a glass table, because through the history of this country, since its inception, it is claimed to be a Christian nation. At some point or another early on, it had claimed that. But if you watch the history, if you read it, you see that all through America's history, there has been no compassion. There has been people walking by, somebody who's hurt or on the verge of death and have ignored it.
Right.
These people built the country on that very principle. They took this land, they slaughtered these people, they imported another group of people to work the land for them, and then arrogantly said, hey, thanks a lot, and yeah, I'm going to write this document that says all men are created equal. Hurry up and fetch my food because I'm getting tired of waiting for it. You understand?
Right.
So that your analogy of the American spirit being bewitching is super spot on. Now, with that said, let me ask you this question. How is it that these people, because Christians, there are a lot of Muslims in the world. There are. I think it's like 1 billion. There's like 1 billion Muslims, or a couple of hundred million of them, right?
Something like
So the Christian church, I wouldn't say is close, but there are huge numbers. There's a huge number of Christians in this world. How is it that they allow this to go on? I mean, you're not the only one that understands this. How is it that they're allowing themselves to be used in this fashion? It doesn't make sense.
You said to peel this thing back, there's so many layers. And I'll preface that because I couldn't answer that in the amount of time that possible.
Of course.
But I'll preface it by saying this. There's no way in the world that you came from Europe to try to come into this land under the auspices of Christianity as a religious underpinning of who you are as a people, and then engage in slaughter and enslavement. There's no way. And a lot of it, like I was doing some research too, preparing for this kind of conversation, because the whole curse, there's a doctrine that they used back in the day of slavery, the doctrine of the curse of Ham. And that's an Old Testament thing where a lot of the Europeans that came to imperialize and colonize this hemisphere and other parts of Africa, they used that doctrine, erroneously interpreted, made up this doctrine that gave them to kind of psychologically teach their own, but also the slaves as they conquered them, that they were cursed. They were the cursed descendants of Ham and needed to be enslaved. Now, that has been a prevailing doctrine in American church evangelical history from the 1500s, when the first Protestants were noted to have been from England under Martin Luther and started the Lutheran denomination here in the colonies from the 1500s. And it wasn't until the 2000, I think, and 18, where the Southern Baptist Convention, which is predominantly Caucasian and white in the Bible Belt, denounced that teaching and interpretation. Look at the time span from the 1500s, and the Baptist denomination came later on in America. But with and Bishop Jakes, I'll name him only because he's a national and international figure. Right. He's made some good YouTube videos where he's been talking about this since George Floyd. I haven't agreed with every little thing that he's pointed out and how he's, calling for action in a certain area. That's him. But he was right in his historical context and delivery of what he was saying. And, the church has been complicit historically. It doesn't make the faith of none effect. It just means that the people that were leading it in different stages of this history, whether it's American history or European history, or even in the invasions of countries in Africa, they saw a loophole. And something that Joe pointed out before about money and why do they do these things?
Yes, sir.
And of course, and so they used even Constantine. You go back into the history of Christianity and Catholicism. Constantine was noted to be the first pope. There's two prevailing thoughts that, Constantine, he became a Christian. Mm-hmm. The other prevailing thought was, no, he was made a pope. He saw that so many people were being converted from Romanism or paganism to Christianity that it was causing civil unrest that he couldn't control. So he merged Christianity and Romanism to calm everybody down and appease everything. So in history, we have these things that have worked itself out, the manipulation of scripture. But it doesn't mean that the faith is invalid or of none effect, because the Christian faith is supposed to be personal and experiential, which means you experience God's forgiveness through Christ yourself.
Right.
It's individual. You can't be born in it, raised in it. It's individual. That's the difference that Christianity or evangelical or New Testament teaching has opposed to the other faiths that we talked about and mentioned. That's the difference. So we see this thing where people are taught wrong and they allow things to happen, and they see because of the doctrinal teaching on these issues, historically and geographically and hemispherically as well. So, that's the best way I can answer that question. I mean, there's more to say, but yeah,
it's a deeper rabbit hole that we will go to.
Yeah.
No,
so the current status is that there is complicity with the church. Yes. And the leaders of today need to acknowledge that fact and not deny it or justify it and hide behind some other facade and call it for what it is. We have been complicit in the racial tension and racism and slavery and the things that our denomination historically has been complicit by not teaching against these things. And I'll mention this last thing as a takeaway for people. If you have not read Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr., look that up and take your time and read it if you're a Christian. Because that right there, his exposition or discourse to appeal to white evangelical ministers of that time was perfect. And I say perfect was perfect in what he delineated and what he was stating as a fact, because he was more abhorred by the white ministers that did not respond to the things that were happening to the people around him that were black, where the Christian faith and their conviction of faith should have compelled them to action, but they were in conjunction with the segregationists and all that. So there's complicity historically with the American Christians or the American churches, no doubt about it. So that's all I got to say.
Wow. Thank you for stating that and really bringing it all together. I think that is very, very important, because it's something that I definitely want to do here. I want everybody to be able to sort of join in the conversation. And, I even at one point was discussing having a Muslim brother on the show, but things didn't work out. However, Mr. Bruno, my brother, I really appreciate you, taking out the time to come and sort of bring something to the table for the people to take away. I really hope that some of the viewers who are Christians start to get a little better understanding of what's really going on around them. Because I think that, people who deal in confusion don't have good intentions. And I really think it's important that people start to understand that as a whole. But again, I wanted to thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Your conversation was insightful. I'm sure there's quite a few people on here that their minds are probably spinning in a loop right now. But I really appreciate you, and hopefully in the near future we can do this again on another topic, or maybe even the same topic. Who knows?
Sure.
But I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for coming on, and we'll speak soon.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Take care, brother. Anytime.
Bless you.
Well, tonight was the first show. Outside of the technical difficulties, I feel like I hope you guys enjoyed it, whoever's been watching. Next week, we're going to be getting into something a little different. We're going to change it up because, we can't go all heavy all the time. But if things develop and I feel that there's something that we need to speak to or address, I definitely will be bringing it to the table. Just keep a lookout. I will be making an announcement as to what we're going to be doing next week. But, again, the set is a place for people to come together as a community. So if you have a business, if you're writing a book, if you're designing clothes, if you're making shoes, if you're teaching anything, if there's something that you want to share or something that you're trying to bring to the table to start, whatever it may be, just inbox us. Follow us on Instagram at the set 6145, or follow us on Twitter, the set 6145. You can send us messages here. The Gmail is on the page. But before I go, I just wanted to make sure that I mention for everybody out there who are into podcasts, you might want to give Gumshoe Weekly a listen. There's a roundtable of interesting young ladies that speak on mystery, murder, and mayhem. The show is quite entertaining. They're a funny bunch. So if you're looking for something new to check out, please check out Gumshoe Weekly, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So yeah, thank you everybody. It's been real. Thanks to Rebel X Sounds and my engineer Peter, doing an amazing job. And I hope to see you guys all next week. Be safe out there.